Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Adam Mazmanian, and I'm the executive editor of FCW. And it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to today's conversation, Modernizing Management Programs and Practices for Federal IT Modernization. As the public sector works to update their systems and modernize their IT workflows, leaders are increasingly focused on project and program management. From proper deployment of resources to maintaining agility in the workplace, coordination and organization of teams to accomplish the task at hand are a key component to success, both internally and externally for the citizens that they serve. I'm excited today to be joined by two leaders in this field from industry and government, respectively. We're joined by Jennifer Hill, Director of Agile Operations at RightStar, and Jenny Rostami, the Acting Director of the Centers of Excellence Program at the General Services Administration. And thank you both for being here. Let's get started. And Jenny, I'm going to start with you. Can you please tell us a little bit about who you are and the work you do at GSA?
Sure thing. So I joined GSA, a short 3 years ago. Feels like nothing. I came over from a startup in New York, and here at Centers of Excellence, I was so energized to join because our mission is to accelerate modernization with our partner federal agencies across the government. So there's really no limit as long as it falls within modernization. And so that's the work that we currently do. We've got over 23 active partners right now. And I joined 3 years ago. I joined as a customer experience lead, which is like a specialist in that focus area of customer experience. And I kind of made my way around to now here I am, the director of the program.
And Jennifer, I'm going to ask you a similar question, a little bit about yourself and how you came to your current role.
Sure. Thank you, Adam. I'm an Agile coach. I'm a practice manager at RightStar. I specialize in scaled agility. RightStar, I should mention, does ITSM and Lean Agile consulting and software implementation, but my particular unit specializes in enterprise agility and in an Atlassian product actually called Jira Align. And we also do provide enterprise Agile coaching through a partnership with a niche firm that does mainly that.
Okay, and I'm going to just start with a couple of questions, and I'm going to start with Jenny. I wanted to ask about the Centers of Excellence. First of all, how do people find you? How do people get into the queue to use your services?
Yeah, it's a funny mix of like word of mouth because we're only 4 years old. So stuff like this, word of mouth. And we started 4 years ago. We were spun up in the White House. We had two flagship agencies, which was USDA and HUD, that were our first clients. And we really we activated all of our centers. We've got data analytics, artificial intelligence, infrastructure and optimization, cloud migration, customer experience, contact center. And now we have two practice areas, one for acquisition, meaning we have specialists in acquisition, as well as innovation adoption, which is really that people part of things. And so at USDA and HUD, all of those centers were activated. We had active work in both of those agencies. We still have ongoing work with USDA and HUD. We've shut down some work streams, opened up new ones. We've been successful with modernization. And it kind of, we just sort of word of mouth. We got involved, obviously, in some things that were very high profile. At the time, OPM doing disaster recovery for one of their mainframes that very famously and publicly had a breach. We're grateful that they, a lot of times other federal agencies trust us to come into the fold and help to accelerate what they've already got going on. So that's really how people find out about us.
Yeah, and with OPM, you had the situation where everybody knew they had a problem. But when you have the HUD, USDA joining you, it sounds like they have to kind of say to themselves, we need to get more agile as an organization. We need to not just modernize our tech, but modernize our skill sets, modernize our processes. How do you sort of come to that decision?
Yeah, it's a mutual thing. It's not unlike private sector. The work that we do is unique because it has, we bring acquisition skills to the table, but then we also bring industry to the table because the work that we do, we are a very lean group of feds. We're typically around 50 headcount, my team of feds, but whenever we do an engagement, typically we're partnering with industry. So we do an acquisition, bring on industry team, and we do whatever that thing is, we do it fast together and with, all the best of both worlds. So yes, it's a conversation that happens organically. They'll come to us with something. Sometimes we'll do a little bit more digging and be like, oh, well, maybe this could, we'll pivot a little, and then we both land in a place that A, we can contribute, and B, that of course there's going to be impact. So.
And Jennifer, I'd like to get your thoughts on what Jenny's been talking about a little bit. As an agile coach, you must see in organizations having to sort of develop and modernize. And what are some things that you see when you go into an organization that it is in that modernization process?
Yeah, one of the things I see is a lot of competing priorities. And I also see some ambiguity and confusion, because I go in as an agile coach wanting to talk about enterprise agility. And what other people start talking about is digital transformation, cloud migration, artificial intelligence, all these other things. So I think Jennifer Rostami's world is much bigger in that sense than mine. She's dealing with all kinds of different digital transformation. And I find that, when I talk about agility, people start talking about DevOps. They might talk about going fast. They might talk about pivot on a dime kind of thing. They're often not talking about agility. They're talking about digital transformation and other methodologies or sets of ideas that grew out of Agile, but they're not necessarily talking about the things I want to talk about. And sometimes I find that Agile transformation is competing with digital transformation. And sometimes I find that people have it completely confused with digital transformation, or it's sort of subsumed by digital transformation.
So it sounds like you're talking about like people putting the cart before the horse, that you need to become an agile organization in advance of some of these other efforts. Is that sort of what you're talking about?
That's a really interesting question, right? Which should come first. So, obviously I have a bias. I would make the case that agile transformation and scaled agile transformation should precede digital transformation, that your digital transformation will go faster if you put the accelerants in place first. But other people, don't necessarily view it that way. And every organization is different. I've actually gone into an organization wanting to demo the software, and I've been told you can't even say agile. You can't even say safe. Like, sometimes the political environment there is just not friendly to those terms. So, but every organization's different. Yeah.
That's a really interesting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because some organizations that we step into are still having project managers in their IT departments. And that for us is a red flag, that we haven't thought about product managers. We haven't thought about the product to the end user and that constant iteration that is part of the agile philosophy. And I famously have some subject matter experts on my team who, agile is critical to a lot of the work that we do. And also it's not central to some of the work that we do, like infrastructure planning. Sometimes it just has to be, there is user research, there's phases of it, but it's not constant and it's not iterative, because the buys are so large and it has to be planned for in advance. They enable agile, but the buy and the kind of like the technology implementation is actually very waterfall, but it's appropriate, right? But then when you're doing software development, it's a whole different game. That's where it's fully appropriate. And we're also stuck in that same boat, Jennifer, where it's like, okay, we have to get on the same page, and we don't even have a software in-house sometimes to enable agile. So yeah.
Right.
I've heard, cliches are cliches for a reason. And one of them I hear in government a lot is, we're trying to rebuild the plane while it's in flight. And I wonder if it's maybe too much, Jennifer, for some organizations to both want to modernize their software and their processes at the same time. But it sounds like, what you're finding is that they do need to tackle all of these things in the right order.
I think that you do. I think one of the things I've really seen is that process change is hard to sell in an organization. I see technology leaders coming to us, and sometimes they'll even admit, like, we know we have a process problem, but I can't sell that, right? If I go to my leadership and say, we need help changing our processes, they're going to say, no, we can fix that internally. And the truth is, you can't. A system cannot change itself. Would be my bias coming from a scaled agile framework. A system cannot have awareness of its own self, cannot change itself. So it has to come from without. So what the leaders will often do is they'll sell the software that supports the methodology. And that kind of opens up a different can of worms, because you shouldn't really use software to drive an agile or safe transformation. But I'm starting to see how that sort of can work if at least one group in an organization has already started an agile and scaled agile journey, and you get that group to onboard to software, then you can use the existence of the software and the user experience of that software, just sort of pull other people in and say, okay, the price you pay to onboard the software is you have to go change your processes.
And Jenny, it sounds like a lot of what you do is you're bringing in people to make this kind of not a problem. People don't have to, a CIO that hires you or wants to use your services doesn't immediately have to address what are the deficiencies in my staff? Where do we have to reskill? Because you can come in and work with them, right? And help them make that plan. It doesn't become, you're not just jumping off a cliff.
Right. Yeah. And that's where some of the benefit of being fed to fed is, because, we don't have a dog in the race, right? We just want that agency to accomplish their goals. Sometimes it's an agency with their own goals. Sometimes there's pressure from OMB to accomplish something. Sometimes there's congressional pressure. And we try to balance all three to help that agency get where they need to go. And a lot of times it is reworking position descriptions, it's workforce planning. Okay, we have these folks in now, but we're starting to transition to cloud. Our data infrastructure is moving into cloud. Okay, do we have a cloud architect? Do we have a cloud team? Do you have someone on the finance team who's going to understand the billing portion? Like, there's a lot of implications to bringing in new technology on the talent side. So yes, we definitely work, and that's the innovation adoption team in the centers of excellence that does that work on most of our engagements now.
And for you, Jennifer, we were sort of touching on this kind of obliquely, but what do you see as the big differences between managing these kind of processes in the public sector as opposed to the private sector?
There are quite a lot of differences. And most of my career, I've been in the private sector. It's just the past couple of years that I've been working with government, and I've really been surprised by the differences. I've got a long list, like long contracts. Private sector, from what I've seen, doesn't usually do multi-year contracts. They're usually pretty short. Staffing flexibility. I have, the sad experience of having worked for corporations that were able to do mass layoffs. And I don't, we talked about that being not desirable, and I fully agree with that. And government tends not to do that. They tend to plan and retrain, reskill, redeploy people within. So that takes longer. I've seen that government is surprisingly decentralized. That I think that's one of the most surprising things for me. I thought that government would be quite centralized, but it's decentralized, and you have to use pull strategies to get people to change. Whereas in a corporation, if you get top leadership sponsorship, you can push change. I think government also has a really complex web of stakeholders from what I've seen. I've seen FFRDCs, federal contractors, consulting firms, all on the same project at the same time, doing what I've heard is called co-opetition. I had never heard that term co-opetition before working in government, but you tend not to see that in the private sector. They typically don't have multiple different consulting firms working on the same project at the same time. And then in government, I see mandates to go agile, but not necessarily sponsorship. And it can kind of lead to some odd results, where people are, say, adopting Jira and Confluence, and they're thinking that they've gone agile because they're using some particular software tools that support agile. It can lead to what we call fake agile or faux agile, where you think you're agile, but really you've made a couple baby steps in the process, but you're really nowhere near where you need to be.
Jenny, I want to pull you in on this question because the question of mandates, you must go agile. These government organizations are so big that maybe there's something coming from OMB, maybe there's something coming from an agency CIO, but how do you really feed these sort of mandates down into the lower levels of the agencies and make it work? Because that seems like a really big management challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I will say there's things that folks have natural appetite to do. So it was already in process. Then a mandate comes out, and it's like, okay, great. It gives it that little extra boost that you need, and maybe a little attention so the agency can find money for it. A lot of times with mandates, the challenge is finding money to support it. If the mandate comes with money, then it's different. And, obviously everyone can make a priority what you've got the money to pay for. So, um, yeah. And sometimes the interesting thing is sometimes you don't need a mandate. But I did notice this too when I came from industry, that it is just how the government works, but you do have some early adopters. Like I've worked with CIOs who have been pushing for artificial intelligence use in their agencies before it ever became really mainstream. And I'm sure many CIOs who could be listening to this are like, yeah, like that's me. I've been thinking about this before it was ever brought into any kind of legislation. So I don't know. I think the thing that it comes down to is it's very difficult. When you are the CIO of an organization, you not only have to think about the O&M of your organization, keeping the lights on, all the systems, the legacy systems you inherited, the public that rely on your agency. Then you've also got to think about modernization, carving out new budget for that, asking for more money for the things that you don't already have money to do. Because every time you change, upgrade, um, got to hire new people, do all the things to modernize, it costs, right? So it's a lot to balance. And, mandates certainly help accelerate them. Budget helps to accelerate it. But it's a balancing act that every CIO manages differently.
And for you, Jenny, too, I'm curious about how you track participants in the centers of excellence. If you have a project, a multi-year project that's coming through, how do you sort of hand them off so that they manage it themselves? What are the milestones? What are the markers along the way?
Yeah, right. So we look for a couple things to make sure we'll have a successful engagement to begin. The first thing we look for is alignment top to bottom. So we work secretary or C-level all the way down to whoever's doing the day-to-day work. And we look for all of those people to be aware of the work that's happening and bought into it. Obviously, like, okay, we're all on the same plan. We understand the outcomes. And then another thing that we do is we have a detailee program where folks from that agency that we're working with can come detail to the COE team, especially for the implementation of whatever the new technology is. We did this at USDA when we did a new CX initiative with them to overhaul the farm loan process. This was about 3 years ago. And then they've returned to their home agency with that experience modernizing, having kind of like incubated in the team here, learning from other subject matter experts. And so that's also another great way that agencies can help have the talent on their own team, when it's time to pass off. Obviously, our goal is to pass the work back to that agency. We don't want to be there for long,
Yeah.
We move on and we want to share with the rest of government, maximize what we've learned at one agency and share it out. So it's really critical. Those are a couple of the formula pieces for success, but I think it looks different. It shows up differently depending on which agencies have different resources. Some folks have the people to detail, some are so beyond short staffed they can't even dream of it. So we just work with what we got.
Okay. And I'm also curious about how, because a big piece of what the Centers of Excellence does, right, is bringing in the private sector to lend their capacity to these projects. You're not the coders. You're not you're a manager. So can you talk about the acquisition process there and how you collaborate with the agency on, in the scoping and selection?
Sure thing. Yeah. So some agencies bring us on. We're acquisition agnostic. We don't care who runs the acquisition. We just want you to get what you need. And some agencies will bring us on. They've got a great process. So my acquisition directors will just lean in on their process. We've worked with FDA on some of their acquisition needs with their in-house group. We obviously advise on how to best implement like agile acquisition where it's relevant. And we can help with like performance work statements, what type of contracts are the best to set up depending on the technology they're looking to buy. And then the other thing that we do is we can do a completely turnkey buy for an agency. Obviously, we're GSA. GSA buys for the federal government. That's one of our mission mandates. And so we have there's so many resources inside of GSA. So, we've been able to pull off very fast, high dollar acquisitions without protest because of the wonderful folks on the GSA acquisition team who do their job thoroughly and well and methodically. And in a way that other agencies can rely on them. So it's really like we use one or two of those things, either GSA or a different agency. Sometimes we even advise like, hey, maybe a different agency has an acquisition vehicle that's more appropriate. We'll advise that. But
Yeah, if we're talking about differences between the private sector and public sector, the bid protest process has to be one of the biggest differences. You can hold up starting work 6 months or more routinely, from my observation. And maybe Jennifer, that's worth asking you about. This, maybe not with acquisition specifically, but just speed. Do you see some differences there in the private and public sector with regards to like the speed of performance?
In terms of acquisition, first of all, I just want to say I have tremendous respect for anyone who understands how acquisition works in government. I've seen one of the books on it. It's about 1,000 pages. When I first started this job, I kind of went on Amazon and looked for like Government 101 or Acquisition 101, and I couldn't really find it. I realized it's a career by itself. It's very complex. It is kind of frustrating how slow it can be. What I have seen that worked is, one of the federal groups I work with they sort of had a credit card. I don't know what the structure was behind the scenes, but they basically had a certain amount of money that they were able to spend without much of anything behind it, like similar to what I might have with an expense account. Maybe I can expense a few $100s. I'm authorized to do that. So I thought that, of course, the number for them was much higher, but I thought that worked very well and gave them some flexibility. Sometimes it's, maybe for just even $5,000 or $10,000, you can do quite a lot. If you just have that flexibility, not having to go through an entire contracting procurement process.
And I want to stick with you for a sec. Jennifer, can we talk a little bit about modernization and management? I know we've touched on it before, but this is sort of the topic of our conversation today. How do you see the relationship between modernization and management in the sense of, do you have to sort of get that buy-in at the top level before you can do anything, or are there other sort of paths to success?
Yeah, tough one. It certainly helps to have sponsorship from the top. I have seen transformations happen from the middle. It certainly does happen, but I think that sponsorship from the top is pretty important, because as soon as you run into some kind of conflict, there's winners and losers in transformations, right? As soon as people figure out who the losers are in the transformation, right, they're going to start putting up roadblocks. So you can get part of the way into your transformation, but as soon as someone becomes unhappy, you're going to need that sponsorship to keep going, or you're going to stall.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, and that's can be something that maybe is hard to hear. If you're at an agency where you're used to, if you're on a part of a team that delivers a service, and the process that you use is something you've been doing for 20 years, and there's, people want to come in and change it, that can feel threatening. So Jenny, how do you manage that process with, especially in the rank and file of an organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and most leaders in IT have to deal with this. It's a reality of the job because our world changes year over year, But one of the things I always advocate for is if you look at your workforce and you genuinely know, hey, there's a place I need all of this talent, to move to that future vision, or I need to reskill some of this talent, and then they'll be the drivers for this future vision. That has to be front and center in the communication. People don't really care, people care about the vision of an organization. I'm thinking like really from the lens of an individual contributor. But they want to know, what's my day-to-day going to look like? Who am I going to talk to? What's my relationship with my boss going to look like? What am I going to do? Who's my team? And when you answer those questions for the individuals who work for your organization, they can feel secure about what you're talking about in the future. If you said, here's what it's going to look like in the future, here's what your team is today, this is the future team, like you provide certainty. um, but I mean, yes, it's a natural human reaction. I think the government gets a lot of heat for that too. But I think one of the wonderful things, and Jennifer mentioned this too about the government, is we really try to think reskill first. And we obviously we've got unions, we've got some representation, and we take all of that into account. And we want really, nobody wants to fire and rehire. We want everyone to come along, because usually we're not talking about eliminating jobs. We're talking about adding new jobs in new specialties. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the pieces of modernization that's so interesting, is that you're really talking a lot of the time about taking some of the most mind-numbing parts of people's jobs and automating them. But it's hard for people to imagine, what am I going to do if I'm not doing this set of tasks 6 hours a week? And so I feel like there's a kind of evangelism, or that you have to bring to the table, where you're trying to really sell these people on, you can be doing, there's a better way. um, and is that something that you sort of cultivate at the centers of excellence, to have people who can make that pitch?
yes, absolutely. That's something that I think all of our subject matter experts do, but most certainly our innovation adoption team is dedicated to that. We have communication specialists on the team. We have folks that think about that future vision, how to articulate it to the different teams, and how to make everyone a part of that. Because that is perhaps the most important thing for any leader, is speaking to folks as what this will mean for you in your day-to-day job, and thinking that through, not just thinking about the technology and the end state. It's about the people who will do the thing. We've been part of, with HUD, we work to eliminate a heavy paper process that would digitize something that was done on paper before, applications that the public turned in. And of course, there are some folks that open envelopes and process paperwork, right? But yeah, you got to think, if you could get through double the work and it's all on a computer and you don't get a paper cut, like that's a plus for your day, but you also have to have the confidence that, hey, don't worry about it. We'll teach you the program. You'll get this training to do it. And, look at your day, how different it'll look. And then it's like, okay, well, this makes sense.
And Jennifer, as an agile coach, is that part of what you do to try to make that big picture
Yeah,
plain to the people you're
that's
working with?
it's just reminding me of, there I work with one, this happens to be a private sector story, but I work with, one woman who's spending, and she's like a PhD, she's a data science person, a tremendously valuable, highly skilled person, but she's spending half of her time doing capacity planning for a group of 50 people in a spreadsheet, and she's doing it like down to that, down to the hour. So if anyone ever got sick or took an unexpected vacation, she'd have to rework her entire plan. And I asked her one day, okay, if you weren't doing this, how would you be spending your time? And she said, well, I'd be creating hypotheses that, data scientists would test, and it would change health outcomes for people. This would save lives. Like, wow. But you're doing capacity planning instead for 20 hours a week. At another private sector company, okay, the product managers are spending all their time kind of coordinating releases and basically kind of doing just coordination, a lot of project manager type work. And I asked them, if you weren't doing this, what would you be doing? So, well, I'd be talking to the customers and finding out what they want in the product. Like, okay, that's the real job. All this coordination isn't the real job. So it does frustrate me that so many people are spending so much time just coordinating people and doing capacity planning, things that software can easily do.
And Jenny, maybe back to you. In terms of, I know there are GSA puts out a lot of playbooks, the government in general. Is there a sort of a playbook for like, we got to get out of this old way of doing things? We are, there are these old processes that are not working for us. What's the pitch there?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked about that. We are actually doing a new wave of playbooks and toolkits over the next 6 months. There's going to be drip released, so center by center, and the innovation adoption team definitely has some work lined up for that. So you'll have to stay tuned on the Centers of Excellence webpage.
Okay. And can you give us just a thumbnail of innovation adoption, what that team does?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So innovation adoption cuts across all the center modernization work that we do. And the focus that they have is addressing the people part of new technology. So adopting the innovation through people. What that means, if you're rolling out, for example, a new cloud technology for your organization that, let's say, 700 people have to use, have you thought through the communications? We do that. We help you plan the communications, the exact bullets, how you're going to break it down, what it means for everybody's day-to-day job. What are the methods? Are you doing workshops? Are you joining stand-ups that already exist across different program areas? They work, we don't think about an agency as a program. We think about an agency as it cuts across all programs. So it's very holistic in what they address. They do people planning. And really just advisory to help every C-level executive involved in the change get the right outcomes, that they're looking for by thinking about people first.
And having been doing this for a few years, have you sort of seen the outcomes where organizations really do become more agile and more focused on the end user experience, more focused on customer experience, and get get past the things that were holding them back?
Absolutely. But, I think sometimes we have in technology, we talk about it like, oh, human centered design. And like, it's just a thing that sweeps an organization and they turn it on one day. But really, I think the reality is, probably Jennifer can attest to this, it like starts with a small movement in an organization or a leader who's really bought in, who seeds it, and then it slowly grows in a good way. And that's usually how we see organizations kind of move from one mindset to another. Um,
Yes,
you
totally.
can accelerate it, yeah, depending on what you do, but it always starts with a group of advocates.
Totally. And I'll sort of scale up that idea. And I'm really hopeful that this is happening. I'm working with a couple of federal agencies now that have a couple seed groups that they've implemented not just Agile, but scaled Agile. They are doing a pilot of Jira Align. And I'm really, really hopeful that their success will breed interest, right? That it'll catch on, because I've seen this happen. I think this scaled agile and the tools that go with it caught on in the financial and insurance services industry. And then I think once a few players signed on, everybody else got on board. Like suddenly it was like the thing to do. And I feel like if that happens in government, if we can just get one or two agencies to do this, the rest will just, it'll be a no-brainer. They'll just pile on. Fingers crossed.
Yep.
And how do you, and I'm going to just jump all, but how do you identify people in an organization that you feel like you can work with who are going to be the sort of seed group?
We definitely, so when we get into an organization and start our work, we are engaging with, obviously, we start with our C-level executives, so they help set up the stage. And then we really like back in the days of everyone being in person, we would live in that agency. We would, hole up in an office, become a part of the department. And we'd meet with working groups, with advocates, people whose names kept coming up in interviews, but we didn't know them, but they're kind of doing this pilot or doing this thing that somebody knew about. So we really try to kind of like put our tentacles out. And through that, and of course, stretching across all program areas, sometimes we even will seed new working groups like, oh, you've got a whole group of people toying with artificial intelligence, building on your data analytics. That could be its own working group, and those folks can help each other and start to accelerate. So that's part of what we do, is help set up that infrastructure so the agency can be self-sufficient. But the investigation work, I think, has to happen no matter what, and it's kind of organic. It comes from those stakeholder conversations.
And Jennifer, same to you in terms of talking a little bit about finding the right people to work with.
Yeah, that's hard. Uh, if I were better at that, I'd be a millionaire. I think I look for evangelists. I look for fans. I look for people who truly understand Agile, who have pursued learning in it, who want to be an evangelist and leader in their organization. They have to be excited about it. I can't drag them into it.
Okay, that makes sense. We're getting close on to the amount of time we had, but I wanted to just get some closing thoughts about modernization and management. Maybe I'll stick with you, Jennifer, first.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really wanted to convey is that if Agile and scaled Agile are on a continuum, right? It's not that you've gone Agile and you're done. I actually see Agile, like team level Agile, at stage 4 or 5 out of 10. There's a long way to go in an Agile journey. I don't think you've really completed it for now, and I'm sure more things will develop in future years. But for now, there's also scaled Agile. We want enterprise agility, not just team level agility. So we want to scale this up to the program, the portfolio, the enterprise, and we want to connect business and technology too. That transformation can take 4 to 7 years. In fact, Scaled Agile Inc., who owns the SAFe framework, they did a fascinating study or poll a few months after COVID-19 and asked their customers, how did SAFe help you navigate the changes you need to make for COVID-19? And they did it by number of years into the scaled Agile transformation. And those who were only 0 to 1 years into the transformation, 20% said it helped them. They agreed. And those that were maybe 2 to 4 years, it was, I don't know, maybe 40%. But those that were 4 to 7 years, 75% said it helped them. So this takes a while. This doesn't happen overnight. This Agile and SAFe scaled Agile journey, it's on a continuum, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while, but you will see the benefits.
And Jenny, I can't resist spinning that into a question for you, which is, for agencies, because there's some parallels. So for agencies that do work with the centers of excellence, do you see, even on projects and efforts that aren't COE efforts, do you see the work that's getting done kind of bleeding out into the organization, kind of getting into the organization and making the organization sort of smarter, more agile, more effective?
Definitely. And I think I'd be missing a piece if I didn't say that we really, I think in seeing this cycle now for a couple of years, I think we also kind of stick with leaders. And that is my hope and my goal, because the government has a lot of leaders that move from agency to agency. That's one of the great things about the government. You take what you learned from one agency and you move to the next. And I've seen leaders carry these things with them into the new agencies that they go to do a turnaround or to do, and I'm really, frankly, just blown away at some of the talent on the team and how they manage to build these amazing relationships. And how that trust that gets built between the subject matter expert on my team and the trust that the agency gives us to open the doors and see, hey, this is what's going on, and we do wind up making, obviously we make technology changes, we modernize, but we stick with the leaders and the folks who are a part of that and become a part of their growth for their life, which is awesome, rewarding.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. And that's all the time we have. I want to thank Jenny and Jennifer both for joining us today and sharing your insights. And to everyone who tuned in, thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned to FCW for all things IT modernization, and keep an eye out for a recording of this conversation coming to your inbox soon. For FCW, I'm Adam Mazmanian, and we'll see you next time.